The Bible is divided into two sections, the Old Testament and the New Testament. The word covenant can be used instead of testament, so the Old Testament is also the Old Covenant, and the New Testament is the New Covenant. These covenants are promises that God made with mankind. According to Christians, the Old Testament is the foundation which the New Testament builds upon and fulfills. The Old Testament is a collection of writings composed by the Israelites prior to Jesus' ministry. There are three types of genres: historical, poetic, and prophetic. The Old Testament opens with God's creation of all things. The pinnacle of his creation was humanity, who was created in God's image. The first humans were Adam and Eve, who were placed in a garden free of pain and death. They had a close relationship with God until they decided to rebel or sin against him. They were cast out of the garden and their relationship with God was broken. Despite their sin, God promised to send a Redeemer to save humanity from spiritual death and reunite God and man. This is the first reference to a figure known as the Messiah or Savior, who is prophesied about throughout the rest of the Old Testament. The following generations continued to sin against God until God finally decided to wipe out humanity with a great flood and restart with one godly family, who was saved by staying in an ark during the flood. The early accounts in the Old Testament revealed how mankind is sinful, but God is holy. God will punish humanity for its sins, but he always offers a way to be saved from this punishment. The rest of the Old Testament focuses on a family. Abraham was a faithful and God-fearing man. God promised Abraham through a covenant that his descendants would be made into a great nation. They would be given a special piece of land, and God would bless the entire world through them. Abraham had a son named Isaac, who had two sons, Jacob, later called Israel, and Esau. Israel had 12 sons, who later became the 12 tribes of Israel. The brothers had significant conflict between one another, which resulted in conflict among their descendants in the future. Israel's family moved to Egypt, where they greatly grew in numbers and posed a threat to the Egyptians. They were enslaved there, so God raised up a prophet named Moses to free the Israelites and lead them as God's chosen people. The next few books of the Old Testament detailed how God made Israel his covenant people. They were given instructions about how to live and worship. The main idea of these instructions was to make the people of Israel holy, or set apart, from the rest of the nations of the earth. This section ends with Moses' death and his second-in-command Joshua taking over. The book of Joshua shows how Joshua led the Israelites into the land that God had promised to Abraham. This book shows how God is faithful in keeping his promises. The book of Joshua is followed by the book of Judges. After Joshua died, God raised up various judges to lead Israel for the next 360 years. This book chronicles how the Israelites quickly fell into a recurring pattern that had grave consequences. The pattern can be broken into 6 stages. Israel sinned, God punished them, Israel asked for forgiveness, God raised a judge in Israel, Israel conquered their enemies, but soon Israel fell back into their sin, and the cycle repeated. Each time the pattern began again, the Israelites seemed to be even further away from God than before, while each judge seemed less devoted to God than his or her predecessor. The book of Judges functions as a model of people's spiritual depravity and the need for God to intervene to save them. It also reveals the inadequacies of human leaders. The imperfect judges show the need for a perfect judge to come and lead humanity. As the judges became less effective, the people demanded a king to be like the other nations. In doing so, they rejected God as their king and forgot their calling to be set apart from other nations. In 1 and 2 Samuel, the author records how God raised up a king named Saul to lead Israel. Saul was replaced by David, who was a man after God's heart. David was the model king who united the kingdom of Israel, defeated the enemies of God, and worshipped God. God promised David that through his descendants he would raise up a king who would reign forever. David had a son named Solomon, who succeeded him as king of Israel. David and Solomon wrote many of the books included in the section of poetry in the Old Testament. David wrote many of the Psalms, which are songs of worship to God, while Solomon wrote the books of Proverbs, which contain wise sayings, Ecclesiastes, which answers the question, what is the purpose of life, and Song of Songs, which is a love letter. Solomon even built the first temple that was used to worship God in. Despite their role in writing some of the Old Testament and building God's temple, David and Solomon struggled with sin, and their descendants failed to properly lead Israel. Like the judges, the human kings were inadequate leaders and pointed to the need for a perfect king to lead Israel. The books which detail the monarchy of Israel after David are 1 and 2 Kings and 1 and 2 Chronicles. After Solomon's death, Israel was divided into 2 kingdoms. The northern kingdom, known as Israel, revolted against Solomon's son and was comprised of 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel. The southern kingdom, known as Judah, remained loyal to the Davidic line of kings and was comprised of the tribes of Judah and Benjamin. Israel fell into idolatry and even began sacrificing their children to the gods of the pagan nations surrounding them. God sent prophets to warn the kingdoms that judgment would come to them if they continued their sinful ways. They said that God would rescue them from this judgment by sending a Messiah to save his people and usher in a new covenant with the people. These messages were recorded and included in the Old Testament in the section known as the prophets. Israel in particular ignored the prophets' warnings, and God sent judgment in the form of the Assyrian Empire to conquer Israel and lead the people off into captivity. Some of the people fled to Judah and unified as one nation of Israel again. Judah eventually fell into similar idolatry and sinfulness, which led to God's judgment in the form of the Babylonian Empire, which conquered Judah and the capital city of Jerusalem. While the people were under Babylonian captivity, God continued to send prophets to his chosen people. Eventually, the Persian Empire defeated Babylon, and some of the Israelites were allowed to return to their homeland and rebuild Jerusalem and the temple. Ezra and Nehemiah were some of the leaders of the project of rebuilding the temple and the walls around Jerusalem. It was around this time that God raised up a final prophet, Malachi, to warn the people to turn back to God and remind them of God's love for them. He reiterated God's promises to Abraham, David, and Israel as a whole to send a Savior to restore Israel and bless the world through him. This led to silence for 400 years until Jesus arrived, claiming to be this Savior.